Hello and welcome to Cash Chats, the podcast from Be Clever With Your Cash that helps you make the most of your money. I'm Amelia Murray.
And I'm Andy Webb. In episode 395, we're doing an election special. The news obviously has been dominated for the last couple of weeks, and it will be for the next couple of weeks as well, around the general election taking place on the 4th of July. So we want to let you know what the big parties are saying about money.
Today we'll mainly be focusing on the manifestos of Labour, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats. We do know that some of you might be supporting the Greens, Reform, SNP, Plaid Cymru or other parties, and we're not saying their manifestos aren't important, especially in Scotland, but realistically it's the three major parties, though the Lib Dems to a lesser extent, where there's a realistic chance of actually winning the election nationally and making these policies actually happen. So that's why we're focusing on their manifestos and what they're proposing.
Yeah, I mean, it would be lovely to talk about everyone's manifestos, but then we would be a very, 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 very long episode to go through everything. But just because we aren't talking about some of those things, it doesn't mean you shouldn't ignore your local MP, obviously, in your constituency. So do obviously check what they're saying about what they might be doing on a local basis as well. So we're just regularly focusing here on the UK as a national entity.
And we are also going to keep our own political persuasions out of this, or we're going to try to. No, we will. Promise. It's all about giving you the information to help you decide who you will vote for on the 4th of July.
Yeah, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through the major topics one by one. And that you might be thinking, hang on, why have you not said about this, X, said about Y, whatever it might be? And that could well be because the parties themselves haven't said anything right now in terms of what they're going to do. And that in turn doesn't mean nothing will happen in the next parliament with whoever wins, because, they might get into power or remain in power, whoever it is, and realise that some things don't quite work out. And they have to sort of raise taxes to pay for some policies, or cut spending to pay for some policies, or just do completely new things, or maybe ignore some of the things that they've said they'll do in this manifesto anyway. So you do have to take it all with a massive pinch of salt. And the other thing to remember here is, as I said, we're talking here about the money policies, the ones that in theory are directly linked to finances, our own personal finances, because that's what we are. We're a money podcast. But everything comes back to that in some way, whether it's the NHS or schools or rivers, potholes, all these kind of issues, right, which are actually day to day we are kind of worry about, or bigger things, defense, immigration, they all cost money, right? So again, for those policies to come around, it may well mean down the line, and it probably will mean whoever's in power, no matter what they say, that again those spending cuts or tax increases in some places will happen for those things to change.
So what are we kicking off with today?
Let's talk about tax. Exciting, right? But this is obviously where a lot of the things that the parties at least seem to think we want to know about, because it does make a difference to how much is in our pockets every week, every month. So there's not a huge amount here. Labour have promised not to increase taxes for working people. Now, whatever that definition is, we don't know, but for working people, say taxes will not change. And fundamentally, that means they have said no change to income tax, national insurance or VAT. They have said they will raise an extra £5 billion a year by closing the loophole in Rishi Sunak's non-dom plan and cracking down elsewhere on tax dodgers as well. So broadly speaking, our taxes are not going to be cut. They're not going to go up, is what they're saying, for the working people and those core tax areas. The Tories have said something slightly different to this, because they are going to offer us another tax cut, and it is yet another cut to national insurance. We've already seen a couple of these just this year, and they are saying there will be another 2p cut from this from April 2027. So not straight away. It's going to take 2.5, 3 years before this would come into play if they were to win the election. And this would be on earnings between £12,570 and £50,270. So those bits that have already been cut down a couple of times. So it'd be effectively 6% in 3 years' time will be the rate there. So that will bring more money back into the pockets of people who are paying national insurance. And they're also talking about scrapping completely national insurance for the self-employed by the end of the next parliament. So a bit sooner than the other changes to NI. This is a bit of a weird one here, seeing as they've not always been too great on saying the self-employed paying their fair share of taxes. So a bit weird they want to sort of get rid of it completely. So you're not paying enough, but then we don't want you to pay it at all. But that's what they're promising there as well. And finally, with the Lib Dems, they have actually talked here about raising the tax-free allowance. That personal allowance currently £12,571. But what's important here, and this is the difference between what they're saying And what other parties like Reform are saying is they're saying they'll do this when public finances allow. And this is really important. I mentioned it before, but really important for everything we're talking about. There isn't a huge amount of money to spend. So these things have to be costed. These things have to be kind of worked out. If we're going to spend over here, we're going to cut over here. So they're saying they want to do this, but we're not sure when we're going to do it. Whereas the other parties, they aren't saying they're going to be changing those thresholds at all.
Yeah, and if you go through the Lib Dem manifesto, there is a lot of those references to the public finance allowing things, which is quite interesting. And I'd advise people to read the manifestos, if anything, just to kind of get a sense of the tone. It's really interesting in terms of that. But yeah, the tax has been, I mean, with the Tories, like, they've gone on a lot about tax since the debate on TV. There's been like a lot of kind of focus on this. And with the national insurance cut, we saw this before in the budget, and with the cuts that came in April, it is technically a tax cut, but it doesn't mean that over time everyone is going to be saving money because of the frozen tax thresholds. And actually, as kind of wages grow and people are pushed more into earning more, they will be paying more tax, and it's why they call it like the stealth tax, because it's kind of sneaky and quiet. And actually, with the savings, so the Tories have said that with the extra cuts to national insurance, the average worker will be saving £1,350, but the IFS is actually saying it's more like £260, bearing in mind the frozen tax thresholds. So it's kind of never as good as it's like seems. Also, like, I don't know if you saw, but on the debate, when Rishi Sunak kept talking about this extra £2,000 that people are going to be paying under Labour if Labour get in, they kept mentioning it. And I remember thinking, why isn't this being challenged better? But then it did come out that the Treasury did try to distance itself from the figures. Rishi Sunak said it was made up of other figures, but actually it was quite misleading, because I think if you listen to that debate, you'd be like, well, the £2,000, that's surely per person per year. But in actual fact, it's £2,000 per household over 4 years. So it's always worth kind of making sure you're following up on kind of these like headline announcements or what people are claiming. There's also,
and that's even if like it's £2,000. Again, those figures themselves might not even stand up. So it's you're right. You've got to be really careful here what's being sort of said. Doesn't mean that everyone's got their calculations right from any of the parties, but certainly that was a really sort of misleading move there in that debate to try and get us to sort of think one thing when it's that's not actually what even their own numbers support. If you can challenge those numbers, but even their own figures don't support what they're saying.
Mm-hmm. And there's kind of other stuff that's going on. Well, other suggestions made around capital gains. So capital gains is the tax that you pay on when you sell assets. It applies to possessions worth more than £6,000, but not your car, or property that's not your main home. So it's essentially, assets that the wealthy are more likely to have. And the Lib Dems want to clamp down on this. So they want to introduce 3 rates of capital gains tax, like there is for income tax. So the higher the gain, the more tax you'll pay. So they want to do 20% tax on gains up to £50,000, 40% on gains between £50,000 and £100,000, and 45% tax on the 100 grand gains. And it would be slightly different today, where today with capital gains tax, it's worked out by your income and the profit, but this would be solely based on the gains. And they also want to extend the tax-free capital gains allowance from £3,000 to £5,000. The Tories also have some interesting suggestions around capital gains tax. So the idea is that they want to offer a 2-year relief to landlords who sell their property to tenants. And I guess, like, in theory, this, it's freeing up housing for people who need it. It's kind of contributing to the stock, which there's a real shortage of. But I always think, I'm like, well, how are they going to police that? I mean, I can just imagine, and I'm not saying anything about landlords, but, kind of keeping property in the family. Like, are there going to be rules introduced to make sure, like, the rule, it's not abused?
Yeah, and actually property, as ever, is one of the things that pops up in a lot of the manifestos. And every time there's an election, they're talking about building new properties. That's no different this time. So Labour say they will build 1.5 million new homes over the next Parliament. Conservatives say they'll build 1.6 million, so a little bit more. The Lib Dems have a slightly more realistic figure of 380,000. I say more realistic. It depends. All we know is that the promise that was made at last Parliament for a huge number of homes didn't happen. A much, much smaller number of that. But again, that's what they're obviously trying to, get that first-time voter first-time buyer in with more properties available for people. And again, that extends around stamp duty. The Tories say they will make the £450,000 first-time buyer stamp duty holiday permanent. That's a policy that they introduced. Temporary measures, they say they make that permanent. Labour, on the other hand, with stamp duty, say they are going to increase it for non-DOMs buying UK properties. I know other parties have talked about scrapping it and changing it completely. I think all those things would be great things to do, but this is what we've got from the main parties. We're more likely to see something along these lines than a complete reform. Although you never know, could be more going on. Another scheme that is currently in existence, which both the Labour and Tories say they're going to make permanent, is a mortgage guarantee scheme. This is where, at the moment, so you've got it right now, already exists, you can get a 5% deposit when buying a home, and the extra money between what the actual lender wants and what you've got is made up from a sort of loan from the government. It's guaranteed by the government that they'll pay this back. So again, trying to get more people on the property ladder. And a similar one to that is a kind of a new Help to Buy scheme from the Tories, offering a 20% loan from the government. So again, all these things pop up all the time, don't they? Whether they work or not is another matter. You can have lots of people saying they don't help people, other people saying it's great to have this, otherwise they wouldn't be able to buy without it. Doesn't stop the problem of house prices still being huge, so massively high that amount you need, even at 5% deposit, even with a 20% loan, still makes it quite hard. But again, they know there are lots of votes in property, so that's why we're hearing those things there.
Mm-hmm. And first-time buyers are often offered these kind of incentives. We see it in the budget every year. So they're clearly a very valuable voter. We've also seen some promises made about changing the rules around leasehold. So leaseholds are weird. Yeah. I lived in a leasehold flat, and it was an absolute nightmare from the start until I got right to manage. So essentially, it's this type of tenure which usually applies to flats where you own the outside of the building but not the land that it's built on. And that will belong to a freeholder. And if that's not you, they can charge you ground rent for just, living in the building on there, or, service charge, which will be in like your leasehold agreement. And the charges can escalate. It's been looked at for years, and there has been improvement. There's been new legislation that has been introduced the last few years, which includes like freeholders are no longer allowed to charge ground rent for new properties, and there's other protection too. So the Lib Dems want to abolish leasehold tenures and reduce ground rent to a nominal fee. Doesn't say what though. The Conservatives want to cap ground rent on leasehold properties at £250 a year. And Labour has said it wants to bring the leasehold system to an end. But this isn't clear if it's just talking about new leaseholds, so, which we've seen a lot of discussion about, or the people who are stuck in the old leaseholds who are still facing problems. Labour also wants to ensure common hold is the default tenure, which is the freehold tenure, and tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rent charges. Again, no specifics there. So we'll kind of have to see with that. And then for renters, there's also been some promises made for them. So Labour want to ban no-fault eviction. So under Section 21, landlords can evict tenants with 2 months' notice, which is, it's really unsecure for kind of tenants to know that is the right of the landlord. They also want to prevent renters being exploited and discriminated against, and empower them to challenge unreasonable rent increases. Again, quite vague language. It all sounds really good, but until we kind of know exactly how they're going to kind of give them more rights and more power, it's kind of, difficult to see how that happen. The Lib Dems also want to ban no-fault evictions and make 3-year tenancies the default. Which would, I guess, give stability, but there'd kind of have to be more detail there as well. They also want to create a national register of licensed landlords. They also want to help people who cannot afford a deposit to own their own home by introducing a new rent-to-own model for social housing. So this would see the rent payments that tenants pay give them an increasing stake in the property, and after 30 years, they'll own the whole thing outright. So again, sounds good in practice, but if we look at right to buy, which already exists, it's all very good kind of offering people more opportunity to buy their own house. And some people did very well buying their council house at a discount. But what about the wider picture? It's all well and good if people are buying up houses, but are they replacing the social housing stock? Because that's just going to lead to problems like long term. And if you look at, we've got waiting lists still for social housing. And if you look at kind of what happened with Right to Buy, now 41% of council houses bought under that scheme are being privately let. So it kind of all goes around, doesn't it, where it's like, oh, okay, it's now gone back into potentially exploitative prices and, not really kind of enabling people to have stable and secure housing. So yeah, don't want to be a downer, but there are pros and cons to all of these.
Yeah, again, and then so there's so many things that haven't been mentioned which could come up. I want people are in power and stuff as well, but definitely there's a lot of policies around housing there. Not so much on pensions, which is not surprising. Lots of ways there was kind of speculation when the Conservative Party abolished the lifetime allowance for pensions that maybe Labour would bring it back in. But Labour haven't said one way or another for definite what they're doing with that. So we haven't heard anything changes there. We have had all three parties talk about this triple lock. Triple lock is where the state pension increases every year are either by the whatever the highest is of average earnings, inflation, or 2.5%. They've all said they will keep that. They'll keep that protected. The Conservative Party have gone maybe one step further here, and they're calling it triple lock plus. This is where the personal tax allowance will also increase in line with the triple lock for pensioners. So not for everyone, but just for pensioners. So this is where it's £12,570 right now. The state pension, as it increases, as that threshold is frozen and the state pension increases, it could mean some of that will be taxable. So the idea would be that you would never pay income tax on the state pension. Now, in reality, most people will have other money coming in from a private pension or might still be working, wherever it might be. So they probably are going to be paying tax on some of their earnings anyway. But that's what the Tories have said they will do with the state pension.
Yeah, and the triple lock plus, oh my God, doesn't it sound great? But the IFS have kind of crunched some numbers and they've suggested it's not going to be that big of a saving for pensioners. So with this age-related personal allowance, I think it's only going to save £100 for the 8 million pensions who it applies to. And that will go up to £275 by the end of Parliament. So yeah, not huge numbers, even though it sounds really jazzy. But another thing on pensioners, quite interesting, two of the parties have promised kind of better support for the WASPy women. So we've chatted about it on the podcast before. These are the women who were born in the 50s, who got messed around in the 90s when it came to the state pension. They weren't told that changes being made to the state pension would mean that their state pension age would increase in line with men's. So many people who were preparing to retire at 60 then found out that they were not going to retire to, 63, 64, 65, kind of throwing their financial retirement plans sort of into chaos. So two of the parties are going to support. That's the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, who have promised in their manifesto that they're going to be, making sure they get the compensation that they deserve.
So education next. One of the big ones from Labour, a big sort of fundraising one they've got, is they'll get £1.5 billion by putting VAT on private schools, so just on fees and other things that they get, because they currently get quite a few discounts as part of education. They say that will be, that money can go and fund a lot of the other things they want to do. Others say that it will just mean that people will move from private schools to normal schools, which will increase the burden on those and increase the class sizes there. But you've got some stats there, haven't you, on that one as well, that actually mean that might not be the case.
Yeah, people have gone mad about the private school changes, haven't they? I hear on the radio quite a lot. But basically, fees have risen in private schools 20% since 2010, and it's not made any difference to the number of children who have been attending. And also the schools might not even pass on the fees anyway, or at least not the full amount. It's completely up to the school how much they charge.
Yeah. What else have we got from education? Labour as well, talk about free breakfast clubs for kids. So more of that. I think it's generally seen as a good thing. Obviously, you've got to fund it, but a good thing for kids. Lib Dem's doing a similar sort of thing there with free school meals for kids in poverty. Hopefully rolling it out to all primary school kids as well at a later date. So I think it's an important thing, talk about education. If kids are hungry, then we know they don't learn as much, they fall behind more. So it's important to kind of anything we do to help there. The Lib Dems have also talked about a toddler top-up, an enhanced child benefit, and some stuff around maternity and paternity as well. And I think there's more as well about childcare, which, well, some of it we know, but some of it we don't from the other parties, right?
Yeah, so the Conservatives tried to include the current childcare rollout in their manifesto. So that is looking at the free hours that children are entitled to, and that's continuing in a tiered way until next year. So I was like, oh, that looks familiar. So yeah, that's already happening. And they're also making some changes to child benefit. So we did see some changes already this year, which means more people can get it. They've changed the thresholds. But essentially, what still remains a bit unfair is that child benefit is based on the individual income of each parent. So people who are in single income parent households, they're the ones who are kind of missing out. So now the Tories want to base child benefit on the total household income, which they say will save the average family £1,500.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is one of those things that it needs reform. I think the opposition parties have been campaigning for reform for a while now, and there's stuff on the way. So I think whoever gets in, that kind of thing is stuff already announced, and more reforms going to come along on that. That'd be very much welcomed. Other things, I mean, one other thing sort of worth sort of maybe shouting out from my point of view was a big policy from Labour around this sort of Great British Energy Company, which basically seems to be a big windfall tax on energy providers, right, energy firms right now, in order to sort of create a nationalised green energy company. So in theory, if that was to work and come along further down the line, we'd be less reliant on oil and gas from other countries who might not want to give us the oil or gas. And that obviously could help us with bills down the line. So that's an interesting one from them. Was there anything else you spotted from the key parties you wanted to share?
No,
that was it. That's all of them. That's all done. Remember, again, I just reiterate as well that the reason we've not talked about the other parties is A, because we haven't got time to go through all of them in all the detail, but B, in most cases, the likelihood of them getting elected as the leading party, as the main party, we're not talking about 1 or 2 seats here or there, but as the main party isn't going to happen, which means they can say all these fantastic policies and policies you might agree with, but they don't have to show they're working. They don't have to show how they actually would fund it and how it all adds up together. It's more kind of a sentiment kind of thing. And you might agree strongly with some of those sentiments, but this is a kind of the big policies I think it's important for us to cover here, just to help you understand what they are saying.
And also, while it is personal finance and, we all want to kind of look out for ourselves and pick a party that's going to look after us, as I was reading them and I was like, actually, there is lots of things that doesn't apply to me, but I could see it really working for other people who need it and basically contributing to a better country. So yeah, that's my top tip. Read for yourself, but also, see what they're offering kind of other people in your community. But we've got much more detail over on the website. I've done a more in-depth article, which we'll be publishing as well. And you can still read the full manifestos online, which will really give you a sense of the approach that each party is taking.
That is it for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Amelia, we'll be back later this week with a Your Money this week, looking at the top money stories. So until then, thanks for listening.
Bye.